Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Naples Chad Podcast. This is actually podcast number 3. Worked very diligently to get a very special guest today, and that's actually real estate attorney Josh Rudnick with Woods, Weidenmiller, Michetti Rudnick. Josh is a extremely busy guy and partner in the firm, and nailing down a day to make this work in both our schedules has been something we've really been working for the last couple of weeks. So I'm very pleased to introduce Josh Rudnick. Josh, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Chad, and kudos to pronouncing the firm name properly. Usually, once it gets beyond Woods, it all starts like fumbling. You get the Weidenmiller Michetti, and then usually I'm called Redneck at the end. So good job.
Oh, hilarious! Yeah, I usually just say WWMR. It's just easier to.
That's the easiest. I always tell people, you're writing out a check to the firm, just put WWMR. It's all good.
Sure. So, Josh, I've been practicing real estate down here for about 23 years and been working with your firm for close to 10 years. If you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and your firm, WWMR.
I've been practicing real estate law for over 20 years in Naples. Went to Laley High School, so I'm Naples guy. Moved to Naples when I was like 12 years old. My dad moved us out of New York down to this place called Naples, Florida, which was a lot different back then, 34 years ago. So got to see it grow, which is great. Obviously when I came back from law school, started practicing, started my career as a prosecutor with the state attorney's office for about 6 months. And then, when all my buddies from high school were sitting in holding cells or tapping me on the shoulder, asking for a deal on whatever criminal charge they had from the night before, or my buddies that I was out with at a bar with, and then I went home and then I saw them the next morning in the drunk tank. I decided I've got too many conflicts of interest. Let me go practice real estate law.
That's awesome.
So I've been doing that. The firm itself, we're obviously we have the big real estate department. We also have a litigation department that's comprised of, right now, I think we've got 8 lawyers in the litigation department, 5 of us on the real estate side. So we're, full, we pretty much, I tell people all the time, I mean, if it involves dirt, if it's real estate, anything involving real estate we can handle, and on the litigation side, we can pretty much handle anything as well. The only things we don't do is, we don't do estate planning, but we don't do, criminal, and we're not smart enough to do intellectual property work. So everything else we can handle inside the firm, which, kind of complements. I think the biggest thing I've seen, people all of a sudden, they're like, oh, we're going to a law firm, you're going to be so expensive, or, oh, you're a bunch of lawyers and you guys litigate, so all you guys want to do is kill deals and put us into litigation. That is, I wouldn't have been doing what I've been doing for 20 plus years in Naples if all I did was try to kill deals and put people into litigation. That's just, as you and I have worked together for 10 years. I mean, our job, obviously, as the lawyer, is to guide everyone through the transaction. So you bring a customer to us, that customer becomes our client. We look out for that buyer or seller's best interest, legally protect them, but we guide them through the transaction. We know that the end goal for everyone is, whether it's a commercial property or residential property, I want to sell the house or I want to buy the house. And both parties have a common goal, which is to close. And as for the realtors, we understand that the only way you guys get paid is if the deal closes. And our goal is to make sure that it does close. And our goal is to make sure that everyone's protected, that no one does something wrong. Because what happens is the last thing I want, and the biggest issue that I always see, is not so much the transactions close. I don't want to call 5 years later going, hey, I'm selling the house, or hey, this issue came up on this closing that was done 5 years ago. So that's kind of our goal. That's kind of a little nuts and bolts of what we do in the firm. But the biggest hurdle, I think, or the biggest question I always get from people is why do I need a lawyer?
Exactly. Yeah, sure.
So, I mean, and that's something that, I'll answer. I mean, I'm very candid with people. As you know, I'm pretty, my mom always says, Josh, watch your mouth, or Joshua, watch your mouth. Because sometimes I'll just be too candid with people and kind of tell them how it is.
Right.
But, the answer is you don't need a lawyer. I mean, you don't need a lawyer, to buy and sell real estate. But at the end of the day, for all of us, I mean, absent, the ultra wealthy, buying or selling a house is the most important investment that any of us are going to make in our lifetime. I mean, whether, you're buying a cash or you're borrowing money, I mean, you are entering into the most important financial transaction of your life, or probably the most impactful transaction in your life.
Yep.
So, and when I tell people that, and I say, do you want, you have a phenomenal realtor that brought you here, but that realtor is not your lawyer. That realtor cannot legally advise you. That realtor is a transactional agent. They're obviously looking out for your best interest, and they're doing everything they can, but they're limited on what they can do. So you need to have someone that has the skills that can guide you, can let you know, when there's some bumps in the road. And, we all wish that every transaction was easy, but that's few and far between. I mean, we see it, it ebbs and flows the way the market is. Sometimes we're like, oh, we've got a good 6 months and we don't have any issues. And then it's like, every deal you're like, is there a full moon today? Because what is going on? Why? And that's our job. Our job is to guide. Our job as counselors. I mean, we're their legal counsel. We will advise. We will help them understand the transaction. We will explain stuff that you as the realtor cannot do, because you're not authorized to do that. That your brokers don't allow you to give them certain advice. So, that's kind of where, we've really excelled and kind of how I've set myself apart. We're not a title company. We're a law firm. We issue title, but we also don't hide. We don't have the ability, and I hate to say hide, but we don't have the ability to tell someone when they come to us with a problem, well, we're just a title company. We can't provide you any legal representation. Because I get calls like that all the time from a buyer who says, hey, I hired this title company to close my deal, but I've got into a legal issue and they can't help me. So I need your help, and we're closing in 3 days. And not to bash title companies, but that's their role, is just as a transactional agent. Their role is transactional. Their role is to just close the deal, issue a title policy. They can't give legal advice. And that's where you find people get really confused. And that's why I think a lot of realtors like yourself that deal with, customers of every walks of life. We may deal with someone that first-time home buyer. We may deal with the Fortune 500 executive, and they will, there's times where they're like, I really feel more comfortable having a lawyer, answer my questions. I don't know how I should take title. I don't know if I should take title and trust, take title and LLC. Should I take it individually? What happens if my wife dies? What happens if I die? So those are all things that, we kind of get involved in.
Sure. Yeah. And I think the thing that's interesting too is that, and I really appreciate the context and how thorough you were in explaining that to the audience. But the other thing is, it's about protecting, right? So if I'm representing a buyer, for example, we just had a transaction that closed, 6 weeks ago, where I had a condominium that actually had a termite infestation we found in the inspection. We wanted to make sure that my buyer was protected after the closing for further infestations or a bigger problem than what we uncovered. So I sent a few emails to Josh and his team, effectively looking for language that could come with what's called a buyer's a buyer's request, right? So after you do the inspection, you turn something over to the seller's agent, and the seller basically requesting repairs or credits after an inspection that are asked for or provided for in the contract. And Josh helped me craft language that was protective of the buyer, so he had peace of mind, not only that they would agree or not agree to this, which could potentially take the deal sideways, and
Correct.
following the contract. It gave peace of mind after the transaction, and that we got a warranty, that we got a service extended, that we had proof of the work that was done and the remediation that was done for the termites, and then a warranty and further asking for these things. And it's like another brain, another set of minds in the room that can help foster this peace of mind for the customer. And that's another whole reason. It's just from your experience in the thousands of transactions that you've done in over 20 years, this is not, brand new to you. You understand how these things play out and what can happen in contingencies and that type of thing.
Yeah. And like you said, I mean, it's thousands of transactions. I mean, we'll handle thousands of transactions, these type of issues that come up. Not every issue is the same, but a lot of issues that I see on a transaction, I've seen them before. And that is just a matter of, handling thousands of closings a year over the period of time that I've been doing this, which feels like forever. We've seen a lot of things. And I think the thing that what I try to instill with the younger attorneys in my office is you can't just, and I think everyone sometimes, you see people that are really good at this and you see people that kind of fall short, is you have to be able to anticipate not just one step, but you got to anticipate 7 steps down the line. So when I look at an issue and we're having to prepare language for something, let's say an escrow or a repair request. Okay, how are we going to solve the problem? What are we going to do if it doesn't get solved? So, if it doesn't get done by closing, what are we agreeing to do? Because we want to make sure, obviously, the parties are all protected. Are we escrowing post-closing? If it doesn't get done post-closing, what are we doing then with the escrow? Or what do we want from that repair? Are we getting warranties? And who's going to be responsible for the repairs and things like that? So you're thinking 15 steps down the line. It's the same thing when we negotiate some of these larger commercial transactions and preparing these contracts. You're thinking, you've got to think so many steps ahead of and understand. And this comes with time and I say practice because it just comes with experience of, okay, I've been in this situation before. I've seen what happens when it goes south. I've seen what results. So we're trying to figure out, how these things, what happens later down the road. The one thing about, how our firm is set up is I will sometimes have an issue that comes up on a transaction. I'll call one of my partners. I'll walk into their office that's a litigator and saying, hey, this is what we're dealing with on the transaction. If we get into litigation, what are you going to want to see? Because I want to make sure that we're protected if the deal falls south or if we're litigating later on. So I know what the litigators are going to want. And that's where you won't get that in a title company. I hate to say it. I mean, they don't have partners that have been litigators for 35 years, to ask a question of going, I've got a situation right now where I have a client that is going to sell, 7 different pieces of property. He's 97 years old, lives in Munich, Germany, and we have to get documents signed by him. And we're trying to figure out what's the best way for him to sign documents to give someone else authority. He's got partners on these deals, and we want to make sure that no one's going to contest his authority. We're flying out to Munich, Germany in December with two other people and a video team to record this guy signing documents with his doctors there, confirming that he's of sound mind. And so that if we're having to litigate this later down the road after these transactions, come to fruition, we're protected so that everyone knows. And those are things that kind of, we're able to do obviously because of the size of our firm, but we're also able to do because we have that expertise, and it helps. It helps everyone, helps the buyer, helps the seller, helps you guys. And when our buyers and sellers are very happy with our work, they're happy because you referred them to us and they're referring more business on. And that's kind of where we come into play to help you agents really build your business because you're referral based. So if you send them to someone that sucks, they're pissed at you.
I love that. That's great to hear about the client that's in Germany and the 7 properties. It kind of begs in my mind the question of, title insurance. And
Yeah.
I think what's interesting is a lot of people that purchase in Naples or Southwest Florida are not from here, or they're purchasing a second, third, fourth home, et cetera. And maybe they're used to doing a transaction in New York State or Illinois or Wisconsin or Pennsylvania. And from time to time, I'll get a question about title insurance and why do we need title insurance, or it's a racket or that type of thing. Can you just walk through for the viewers what title insurance is, the importance of it, please?
Sure. Yeah. And, I answer that question every day. Someone gets a closing statement and they say, oh my God, this title insurance premium, why am I paying for this? And that is like, that's the question. They're going to call you first and they're going to say, do I need it? And, and you see that a lot when there's a finance transaction, because the lender requires lender's title insurance policy. The lender requires the buyer to pay for title insurance for the lender's benefit. So you issue a mortgagee policy in favor of the lender, but on their closing statement on the CD, it'll state that the owner's title insurance premium is optional, because the lender's not forcing the buyer to get title insurance for themselves. So then a buyer calls me and says, hey, I guess I don't need it. And I say, well, think about it this way. Before we even go into why title insurance is important, the lender sees that it's so important. The lender's making you pay for it for them, but they're telling you, you don't need it for your own benefit. Right there should tell you, well, there's probably some importance here. So maybe I should get title insurance. And I tell people, the other thing I tell them before I even go into that whole list of why it's important, I say, when I buy real estate, for whether a house or an investment property, I pay for title insurance. I can review a chain of title better than anybody. I can review it better than my title examiners for the title underwriter review. And I catch mistakes that they make all the time. But I have closed so many deals when a title issue comes up 20 years after someone bought a house, or 10 years after they bought this property. And it's asking for, let's just say that we need a continuous marriage affidavit because there's no marital status, or we need an affidavit from John Doe that executed this deed 25 years ago to confirm whether they were married or the property wasn't their homestead. And I call up the people and say, hey, you didn't get title insurance when you purchased the property, so I don't have a title policy to go off of. But this guy, John Doe, executed this deed 25 years ago. We need to get an affidavit from him. And I have no idea where he is. Do you? And now we're chasing to clear up some little cloud on title. If I had that prior policy, we're able to use that because the title underwriters all work under a treaty, and they'll write a new policy and the closing will occur. There won't be an issue. You won't need the deed because they'll just write off of the other policy. So they're basically so the risk is minimal because they're issuing title insurance, but they know that under this treaty, the prior title underwriter that insured the transaction will cover them if that John Doe's kids come later on and say, hey, this was his homestead and he was married to my mom at the time he executed the deed, and mom didn't sign the deed. So we're claiming we still have an interest in the property. And so the importance of title insurance is it goes back to, I'm buying something that is probably the most important investment or biggest investment I'm ever going to make. I'm paying a title premium for insurance to ensure that my title I receive fee simple, marketable title to the property. I have an insurance policy that if somebody knocks on my door, or if the closing agent missed something, they missed a mortgage, they missed someone that had an interest in the property, I can go back to that title underwriter, that's an insurance company, and say, you gave me a $1 million title policy. I need you to cure this because I have an issue now. It's the same thing of I buy a house. And I hate to even use Jamaica as an example. I buy a house in Jamaica. I don't need insurance, but now I have a Category 5 hurricane that's literally an hour away. Anybody that doesn't have insurance, they usually want insurance when they know that the hurricane's coming. That's why insurance companies don't write policies once you're in this threat of a hurricane. And they know at that time, their phones are going to be ringing off the hook. People are going, do I have flood insurance? Do I have this? And I have that. It's the same thing with title insurance. You don't want it unless you need it. It's the same thing with lawyers. You don't want them unless you need us. It's like everyone hates hiring lawyers until they really need a lawyer. So, it's that. I mean, it's those benefits. I mean, it protects you against the hidden defects, errors in the public records, because people make errors. Public records can be, someone can miss something. I mean, there's a host of things that, that benefit you. And it's not like homeowners insurance or car insurance where you're constantly every year paying a premium. You pay it once and it protects you for the lifetime in which you own that property.
Yeah, I think the other thing that I just popped into my head, from the myriad of transactions that I've done with your firm and my customers have, and that's if somebody is getting a loan, say I'm representing a buyer and they're getting a loan. And one of the benefits, and I say this all the time, because the customer has a choice in which bank or mortgage company they're going to work with. And not all mortgage companies are created equal. The beauty of when I work with Josh in WWMRs, there's people on his team that I say are kind of like the quarterback, because somebody originates or does the loan, the first point of contact, the salesperson, the good person that promises all of these things. And I'm going to close this loan in 30 days and 45 days. Yeah. And what happens is I use WWMR in these transactions because they're quarterbacking the communication of where the loan is in the process after we have an effective contract all the way to closing. And there's people on Josh's team historically, and this is important for people that want to purchase real estate and use a mortgage or get a loan, is as soon as we have an effective contract by both parties, I submit it to their law firm. Then Josh's firm reaches out to my customer. That customer then is in contact with the firm. The firm also reaches out to the mortgage company, and they're in constant communication from day one to the day of closing. And we literally know where the loan is at all times, and if any potential hiccups in meeting deadlines and meeting, that type of thing. And I can't tell you how many times I've worked where have seller on the other side, and the buyer has a mortgage and they just have a title company with no law firm, no representation at all. And I have no idea what's going on with that buyer, that loan, that type of thing, because the people they've hired in just a title company either is lazy or they don't care or they can't be bothered because they have too many other clients and customers to work with. And we're just kind of crossing our fingers and praying that this thing's going to close when it's supposed to,
Yeah. And, and then one thing that, and I've always called you and saying, listen, that lender says they're going to be ready to close and everyone wants to move up this close in 30 days. I said, but what the lender doesn't realize is there's no survey available. So we still need a survey. And then the lender says, no, I don't need a survey. And then I go back and I say, no, this lender doesn't understand. The lender is going to require me to issue a certain type of endorsement to their policy. And I can't issue that endorsement unless I have a survey. Right. And that's where, again, it comes in, okay, Josh, how do you know that? Do you have a crystal ball? I'm like, no, because I've done this for 20 plus years. I can literally say, there's no way in hell we're closing this deal right now. And it is, there's, you have a loan officer that is, they're salespeople. They've got to bring that loan in, but they don't do the underwriting. And then there's a million lenders out there. And, I hate it when someone says I'm using Rocket Mortgage and I'm like, oh, here we go. Can you please just use a local lender? And, so because I'll be able to pick out, I mean, I have a deal right now that we've extended 3 times. My client has had to release a $250,000 deposit to get an extension because the lender could not get it done. And I've had to counsel him behind the scenes saying, listen, you got to go with someone else or you got to get cash because this lender's not going to get it done. This is not happening. Where we've already pivoted to another lender, we're closing today. The first lender's emailing me going, hey, yeah, this is not going to get done. We're going to try a different product. When's your closing date? And I email them and say, hey, you're out of the game. Like we've already moved on. I saw the writing on the wall 3 weeks before you were able to just put up the white flag, and they'll do that. I mean, and that's the unfortunate thing for a buyer. And again, you're talking about somebody's, they're using their life savings to buy this property. They're trusting this lender. They're trusting this person. And we're able to kind of have that call. And I'm able to call up that buyer and say, listen, you need to pivot. Like right now, trust me, this is never going to happen, because they're going to keep kicking you down the road with them. And I'm seeing the writing on the wall right here. I'm seeing what they need. They're never going to get it. So let's pivot. We got to protect you, because if not, you're going to lose your deposit.
Yeah. And we're talking 10 to 20% potentially in a lot of these transactions.
Correct. I mean, you take it even a step further. I mean, lenders, just, and you could tell them, listen, the buyer's deposits are, they're non-refundable. Like if you don't close this today, this buyer's losing the money. They have no liability.
Right.
They're just saying, hey, this is our underwriting procedure. There's no, you can't, I've had clients, can I sue Bank of America? Like, no, you can't sue Bank of America.
Right.
Yeah. It's like, because why? They didn't give you a loan? Like that's, that, and that's, it's scary, because you see people, and I'm not saying these people, I've had it where you have these titans of their industry, but they're good at developing an AI, artificial intelligence application, but they don't understand how to get a loan because they've never done it.
Right.
Or they've done it once before, and now they're going to be buying something else. And, so they need that guidance. And that's where, obviously you and I, we've always, you call me, I'm like, dude, this is not going to happen. Like we got to pivot, or let's do this, this, and this, or don't move up that closing yet, because I've got title issues. I need that survey. And if you move up that closing, I may waive my right to make a survey objection. So like, I can't wait to move up the closing. And that's where, I think the biggest thing where I tell people that your biggest success in this crazy real estate world is managing expectations of people, and communication. It's like, I mean, I'm at my firm, I mean, I probably shouldn't say this publicly, but I care if someone makes a mistake on a document, but we can always fix that. When my staff, misses something on a closing statement, misspells someone's name on a deed. Yeah, it makes me mad. I'm like, why didn't you catch this? What, you were moving too fast. But one thing that I do not tolerate, and one thing that drives me crazy, and the staff knows it, how come you didn't return that email? How come you didn't return that phone call? Like, those are the easiest things, because 99% of people, they just want to be heard and they just want an answer. If you make a mistake, if you call someone and say, hey, I made a mistake, but it's already fixed, they don't care. They're like, but if you don't return their phone call for 3 days, they're burning you at the stake. So
all good stuff. I want to move into something that's a little more hopeful and maybe deliver a little good news. Let's talk a little bit about Homestead. Let's talk about domiciling in Florida. We have a lot of people that maybe are retiring, or they especially with things going on politically or financially or tax reasons, make a decision that they want to declare or have established residency in the state of Florida. Can you talk about domiciling in Florida, establishing residency, and then Homestead and the Save Our Homes cap, if you don't mind?
Sure. So, a Homestead is, we have, everyone thinks when they think about Homestead is, there's Homestead's broken into two sections of our Florida Constitution. Okay. So everyone right away, when they think about Homestead, the first thing they think about is the tax benefit. So I make my house, my primary residence, my homestead, and that will give me the tax benefits of, right away as a homeowner, I receive that $50,000 reduction in the assessed value. Okay. And then it's broken down where, the first $25,000 applies to all property taxes. And then the second $25,000 is a portion of the assessed value between $50,000 and $75,000, excluding school taxes. So, basically you get $50,000 reduction in the assessed value. So every time the it's not the IRS exemption of $250 a person from capital gains and $500 for married filed jointly. This is a $50,000 reduction in the actual assessed value of the property for property tax purposes. So husband and wife own it, you get $50,000. I own it individually, I get $50,000. I own it, jointly with my significant other, but we're not married, but it's both of our homestead. We get $50,000. It's just $50,000 off of that. Okay. Then the next benefit is you're saving homes, and that Save Our Homes, which basically it limits how much your property's assessed value can increase annually. So it's 3% or the CPI, so the rate of inflation. So that is where you will find people when they say, I have about $300,000 of Save Our Homes benefits to my house. So even though my property value's gone up 25% year after year, my assessment is only based on a 3% or CPI increase. So I've accrued all of this tax benefit. So even though my home is worth, $5.5 million, I'm only being assessed on $1.5 million or whatever it is. Okay.
Right.
So that's where you find a huge benefit. And that's why people, when they buy the house, they want to file for homestead. They have to own it as of January 1st of that year. So everyone that has closed on their house this month and next month and 5 months prior or after January 1st of this year, that it's going to be their homestead, they're all going to be filing for homestead for 2026. And they'll get their applications in before March 1st with the tax collector's office. So that is the tax benefits of homestead. The other benefit to homestead is the protection from creditors. And that is under a different, portion of the Florida Constitution, where it protects your homestead from forced sale by most creditors. And I say most creditors, I mean, obviously, mortgages, mechanics liens, contractors liens, Uncle Sam, they don't care about anything. They'll take whatever they can and they'll laugh at it. But you do have that protects your homestead from forced sale by creditors. So my house is protected. If I get in my car and God forbid I run someone over and they get a $3 million judgment against me because I was texting and driving, which I'm probably the worst person that does that all. They get a $3 million judgment against me. They can't take my house. They're a judgment creditor of me. I have to deal with them, but my house is protected. So I sell my house. They take the proceeds, put it in another house. I die. My judgment creditors, my family, my homestead, my son is protected, and things like that. So that's where homestead provides a lot of benefit. Obviously, if you use fraudulent money to purchase your homestead, and RICO's going to take your home, they don't care. But OJ's probably I hate to use him as an example, but probably the biggest example of protecting his home from judgment creditors, because he bought that property in the East in Miami after there was all of the stuff went down after the murder, and then the family sued and got a judgment, but they couldn't touch the house because he was protected. So that's where you find that's kind of like homestead nuts and bolts. It's what makes Florida very attractive. That's what made Florida very attractive to a lot of criminals as well. And a lot of people that had, a lot of credit issues. They were able to buy these elaborate homes, these big estates, and they were able to protect that asset from judgment creditors. It also protects spouses. If I am married, even though my spouse isn't on title to my property, I cannot alienate my property. I can't go ahead and get a mortgage against my property without the joinder of my spouse, even though they're not technically the owner of the property in the public records. I can't sell the house without my spouse joining on that. And that's something, we deal with all the time on a closing. Wife owns the property, but she's married, and husband and her, it's their homestead and they live in the property. So husband has to sign on the deed. I've had issues where there's estranged marriages, and someone goes to sell the house. I'm like, hey, your spouse needs to sign. I'm like, I don't know where they are. I haven't seen them in 20 years. I'm like, well, you're still married. Well, we need to get them to sign. I don't even know where to find them. I'm like, well, then go get divorced real quick if you want to sell this house. I had that happen in I think it was like in 2007 when we were doing all these short sales, and this woman, was short selling her house, and we got everything approved, and there's like a 9-month process to get everything approved, and closing was going to occur. And she tells me, she's like, oh yeah, I'm not single. I said, well, okay, well, where's your husband? She's like, I don't know. I met him in Jamaica on a trip. We got married. She's like, I think he drives it. Yeah. She goes, Jamaica keeps coming up for whatever reason, but it is true. She met him in Jamaica on a trip. She goes, I think he drives a taxi in New York City. I'm like, well, we get a hold of the husband, and he's just, how much money am I going to get from this? So, Homestead is great. It has great benefits. In my world, it can create some problems. It can create, I've had issues with estranged children. I've had issues with, having to chase people down to get deeds signed, and there's children from other marriages, which makes it even, more of a sensitive issue. So, but Homestead is very good, and there's a lot of protections to it. And that's what makes Florida very attractive for people.
Let's segue real quick, just to clear up any misconceptions from the public. What is to establish residency in the state of Florida in order to enjoy a homestead exemption or a saver home exemption? What needs to be done for somebody that wants to establish residency in the state of Florida?
Make sure it's your primary residence. You would go ahead and establish Florida. This is my primary residence. As of January 1st, I register to vote, get a driver's license, register the vehicle, update mailing address, bank accounts, federal tax filings. And then you can even go down to the clerk's office and file a declaration of domicile. It's important to do all of those steps, especially if I am a person that's leaving a very high state income tax state. So, I'm leaving New York. I want to make sure that New York cannot come after me. I'm leaving California. I want to make sure that California is not going to come after me for tax purposes and start hitting me with that income tax. That whole 6 month and a day rule. Florida's not, we don't have state income tax. So they're not policing that. California and New York. I have clients that have left California and they had to leave all ties, meaning they had to, no more golf memberships in California, no more property in California, update all your estate planning in Florida, make sure, and these states will monitor your tolls. They'll monitor your credit cards. They'll see, well, you know what? You've been eating out in Manhattan, for the past 6 months. You're paying, you're going to pay the state income tax. Oh, and FYI, you're going to pay the New York City tax. So,
right.
You watch the news right now. Every realtor in Florida, especially in like Palm Beach and Miami, they are all, if they could cast a vote for Mondami, they're going to be voting 100%. For him. Because 100%. They are just wait. And then every realtor in upstate New York and Long Island, they're all hoping that he wins the election because they're like, okay, there's going to be another mass exodus. Let's go ahead. And you're starting to see that a lot on the news. You're starting to hear a lot of that. So that's why it's very important. My advice to everyone is I'm not an estate planning attorney. So when I have my clients, my very high net worth clients come to me and say, I need to make Florida my homestead. I need to get out of this state. I do not want to pay state income tax. We have to, not only I have to be involved, I have to get Florida estate planning attorneys involved. I also need to get their CPAs involved, and I need to get their attorneys up in the state that they're leaving involved, because we need to make sure that we're doing everything correctly, so that once it's all done, and it's going to cost money, but once we get it all done correctly, now they're not having to pay this high state income tax.
Right. Because there is stories about Pennsylvania, California, Michigan, New York, New Jersey, et cetera, trying to claw back income or potential taxes and things that they believe are owed by these people leaving these states. So what you're doing
Correct.
is you're uncovering, you're dotting every I, crossing every T, and making sure this is ironclad protection against potential clawbacks or judgments or monies that these states feel that these people are, owed to them. So
correct.
Yeah.
I mean, some of these states are talking about doing exit taxes, so you have to pay a tax on the way out. It's crazy, but
right.
But it's important, because if you don't do it right, and I'm the first one, and I tell people all the time, I'm not a tax attorney. I'm not a CPA. I can't give you tax advice. I'm not a estate planning attorney. I can't give you estate planning advice. I could tell you how to hold property and title and deal with that. But I will be able to quarterback, like you said. I mean, I can be the quarterback of this transaction, but we need to bring in the entire team. Understood.
And then I just have a couple more topics I want to cover before we finish up. One is how they're taking title to a property, like maybe what the benefit of taking title in a trust or an LLC versus an individual name or jointly, and what you're seeing in that, and maybe some of the advice when people ask you that question of how they should take title to a property.
Yeah, I mean, commonly married couples take title as husband and wife, and creates what we call as a tenancy by the entirety. So that is the preferred method when it's just normal. When I say normal, not a blended marriage. There's not children from other marriages and things like that. So when I have a husband and wife, married couple, take title as tenants by the entirety, it gives you the same benefits as the joint tenants with full rights or survivorship, meaning that if one spouse passes away, title automatically is vested 100% in the surviving spouse. But it also gives you protections against creditors. So one spouse's creditor can't come after the property because it's their homestead property, and they own it as tenants by the entirety. There's times where a single person, they have children, they may have a partner, they want to protect that person and avoid probate. Taking title in a trust is always the preferred method. The blended marriages, a lot of times, they want to protect their children from the prior marriage, and both parties have different financial considerations. So they may take title in each respective trust as tenants in common. Because if they want to have the property as a homestead property, they can't hold it in a corporate entity. So I can't take title in a limited liability company if it's going to be my homestead property. But if someone wants to own property and it's in some type of investment property, and they want to have the protections of corporate protections of a corporate veil, we get with their CPA and say, hey, what do you have? What are your thoughts to maximize their tax benefit from a legal standpoint and a liability standpoint? We're telling them to take title in an LLC. That way they're not individually liable on the property. They're going to be leasing the property out. Does that work with your tax planning for them? There's other considerations when you take title in an LLC. One is insurance. One is, getting approval by an applicable association. Another one is if you're obtaining financing. If you're taking title in an LLC, your run-of-the-mill residential lender may say, no, I can't lend you the money. You got to go to a commercial lender. So the rates are going to be higher, than just owning it individually as a second home, and then if that's the case, we have to go through this whole exercise of, okay, here's the pros and cons, here's the liability. we can hedge some of that risk by getting you these type of insurance policies, and you got to bring in an insurance advisor. So it does get complicated. Right. And that's why I say, you're going to come to me that's been doing it 20 plus years. You're going to go to a title company that's opened up by maybe some of my former employees that used to be secretaries of mine. I mean, they can't give you that advice. Oh, wait, they have an attorney on staff. Yeah, good luck, because that guy's just letting them use their name. Right. And, good luck getting a hold of him, because he's probably out playing golf all day long, or, at the bar. But those are things where we'll get involved a lot, because there are a lot. There's, like I said, you have to manage the client's expectations. You have to understand what their intent is. And then we have to look those steps down the road. What happens if you die? What happens if you get sued? What is your intent with the property? What are you looking to gain from this? Is there a tax consideration? Is there a estate planning consideration? What is the potential liability? And then, is it going to be your homestead or not? Because that's going to really drive what we're doing. And again, are you getting financing or not? That's another factor to consider. Sure. So, just giving someone the run of the mill, this is how you take title to real estate, it doesn't work that way.
And something changed this year. Federally, isn't there some reporting that needs to be done if it's done in an LLC or a trust? Didn't that just change this year?
Yeah. You have to, the financial and economics crimes, you have to show the beneficial interest, but that keeps, they tell you need to do it. And then someone files a lawsuit and there's an injunction, and you don't need to comply, then you need to comply. And then, you've got that, then you've got, our governor with the parties of foreign countries of special concern. So, you got to sign an affidavit and make sure you're not from the People's Republic of China, or, Russian Federation, or, you're not working for Venezuela and you're not a citizen, so there's those affidavits that need to be signed as well. But yes, when you're buying property in these LLCs, we have to show who the beneficial owners are.
Okay, last question. And I do a lot of work in condos. I've sold an inordinate amount of condos in my real estate career. Florida has something that's very interesting compared to other states, in that we have legislation that was passed, and effectively we have the milestone survey that's done. And then we have this SIRS reserve study that's done that, as I understand, is 3 stories or more, correct? And
correct.
You can walk people through this and what this means and what you've been seeing since this legislation's been in place, and kind of like maybe break it down in a cursory level for the audience, but also like, what are you looking for in these transactions, especially if assessments haven't been levied, or if they have shortfalls in reserves, or what that can mean for a potential buyer, and what you've seen, in the last year or so, last year and a half, 2 years, if you could walk people through that, because I see this a lot.
Yeah. So, right now, I mean, most of these condos that are 3 stories or more, and it's 3 stories of livable, so there was this whole thing. There was some clarification made as, does the parking garage and then 2 stories above, does it qualify? Yeah. But the change was, and that reason, 3 stories or more of habitable, that was, I think they just passed that in July. But you had the milestone inspections where the associations need to have these milestone inspections done. If a building, brand new construction, they're exempt from that. I mean, because it's new. But if the building reaches 30 years of age, these inspections have to be done, and then every 10 years thereafter. And then if they're within a certain distance of the ocean or a coast, it's 25 years that these milestone inspection studies have to be done. And then there was the structural integrity reserve studies, where they went through and making sure that not you, but the associations were properly having reserves for these major improvements. So, obviously, roofs, the MEPs, the mechanical, electrical, plumbing, things like that. we needed to make sure that those were all in place. And where it came into where in our practice, and for obviously buyers and seller, where it was important was wanting to make sure was the milestone inspection done, was the reserve study inspection done, and has the association had to pass any special assessments, or are the assessments going up considerably because of the results of these inspections? Were there improvements being made? And this all came because obviously with the collapse of the condominium in the on the East Coast, they came out and said, listen, we need you associations, you have to do an inspection, and we need to determine if there's any structural deterioration that is risky. Are there these imperfections in the surface of the building? Is it sagging? Is there deflections? Is there misalignment? Are there signs of leakage? I mean, because these are all things that lead to potential collapse.
Right.
And it's not to determine whether the building is even in compliance with Florida Building Code or Fire Safety Code. It's basically, we need to make sure that these buildings are not going to collapse into the ground. So where you found the hurdle was these associations were like, okay, we need to do them. Who needs to do it? Well, you need to go find a licensed architect or engineer to do it. Good luck finding someone that wanted to do it, because a lot of these architects and engineers are like, I'm not touching that. I'm not going to
putting my name on it. Right. Yeah.
Correct. So these associations had to get all of this done. And it's important as a buyer to make sure that you understand, you get copies of those. You also get copies of, knowing, am I going to have to pay all of the, what am I going to have? Well, how is this going to financially impact me?
Right.
And that's where it was something that, by the end of this year, if the building reaches 30 years of age after July 31st and before, December 31st, the initial inspections have to be performed before the end of this year. So you want to make sure when you're buying, and that's one of all of our new forms on these contracts, they have a provision that requires the sellers to disclose, is it subject to this, and has this been done? And that's where, you really want to do your due diligence, both as a buyer's agent and a buyer and a seller's agent and a seller. Get copies of all that. You and I have had this conversation. I have this conversation with realtors all the time. If you're taking a listing, the time to ask for all this stuff is not when you get an offer. You should have all this stuff when you put that property on the MLS.
Absolutely.
Because you don't want to be waiting, when you don't want a buyer to execute a contract and then give them an extra, now you have 7 days of a condo review, and that's 7 business days.
Right.
I mean, from when they receive all these documents. So, you want to make sure, hey, I want that 7 days. I want to know in 7 business days that we've got some sort of a hard deal, or that one contingency has been met. You don't want to be 30 days into the transaction and now another 7 business day clock starts, with getting condo docs and all this stuff. So it's important. But these are, I think now, the shock and awe of that has kind of subsided. People know, okay, it's standard operating procedure. Let's get it done. Most of the management companies, from the deals that I've seen lately, everyone's pretty much up to speed on it. They knew what needed to be done, and they've got it all done.
Right. And I think it's important. So there's a lot of wealth in Naples. There's a lot of people of means that are retired that reside in these buildings. And just to paint the picture, with Surfside in Miami, effectively you have people that retired in an older building. I think that building was built in the 60s or 70s. And effectively, they might have had, suggestions for management that we need to take care of this capital project or that. But people retired on a fixed income are like, no, it's good. We'll do it later. No, we'll do it later.
Yeah.
We're going to keep the fees, the quarterly condo fees flat. The building falls down. And so, the mentality about this with the state of Florida and the protection we're looking for is you need to make sure we're not kicking the can down the road in capital projects regarding structure and regarding reserves and that type of thing, because the biggest portion of the condo fees that somebody pays quarterly as an owner is the insurance portion. The other part is if they haven't done milestone, if they haven't done the reserve study, if they haven't done the capital projects and the fixes, they may not be able to bind insurance. And if they can't bind insurance on a building that's on like the beach, you're in a self-insurance, issue. And what we're trying to do is having the foresight. So I'm teaming with Josh and his team. I'm looking at it's 3 stories or more of habitable in terms of height. And I'm effectively making sure and I am measuring 17 times before I cut, because I don't want surprise. I don't want a closing and then my buyer 3 months later to get an email, by the way, we just passed this resolution as a board and we're assessing you a $30,000 assessment for this. I mean, I'm asking for 12 months of meeting minutes. So I use these 7 business days, which don't include weekends. So you could write a contract on a Thursday, go effective on a Friday. The contract says it starts the next day. Well, weekends and holidays don't count. So I could have 11 days where my buyer has this due diligence period. We don't disclose in Florida the actual condo fee on a form. That's discoverable in the financial statements and the documents, right? So I'm going through all of this and teaming with you. Am I missing something? What are your thoughts? And I'm constantly asking Josh or his team, what are your thoughts on this? What are you seeing? I just want to make sure that I don't have an instance that we didn't find something in a meeting minute, that there's a vote coming in 4 months about a big project that is not budgeted for or accounted for. And that is because if you buy a condo for $1 million, but you get a $50,000 assessment, no, your condo was actually $1,050,000. And it was my job to discover and explore these things. And I'm trying to prevent that scenario from occurring. That's why, and that's why we're talking about this. Yeah. Well, Josh, listen, I really appreciate your time. Man, it's been great.
It's been fun.
Guys, again, Josh Rudnick with WWMR here in Naples, practicing over 20 years. They've been my go-to attorneys. I always suggest, I say, you're welcome to use whoever you like, but I strongly suggest, Josh and WWMR and more importantly too, like the people on his team. Like you said, I think it's amazing because Josh is literally up at the crack of dawn, like answering emails and texts and always. Josh has already sent me 2 emails at like 5:30 in the morning. So nice peace of mind on my end. So
I'm a little nuts when it comes to that. So
Josh, thanks again, brother.
All right, anytime.
Have a great week.
Thanks for having me, bud. Okay.